Come on, guys. I've been with you all this time. All right. Those of you who know me then know that like my passion and my love is accounting, right? And I'm a self-professed accounting nerd, but to get the accounting right, you need strong financial policies. And a lot of times our financial policies, when they are weak and you have an accountant either with a whole lot of experience or not enough experience, and weak policies don't go together. So a lot of this program, Mike Wagasback, when he welcomed us this morning, he talked about being trusted advisors. And I love it when people have conversations with me and ask me questions. And one of my favorite conversations is, Diane, can we go off the record? Absolutely. Because I want to be your trusted advisor. I do. And in bringing you this program with all of these people who are these experts, this is why we want to do what we do, to help you and to help you in your work, because your work is really, really difficult, and we know that. And we also know that we all have different strengths, right, and different knowledge, and we come at it from a different way, but the most important thing is that we love where we work. We love our governments, we love our people. I worked at a school board, and or two different school boards, but I remember one night, during budget season, it always happens, I stay there late at night, try to get my budget. They have to adopt on time, big budget, whatever. I'm driving home at 9:30 at night. I have to turn around the next morning and get ready for work the next day. And I pass a school bus on the street. And it reminded me of why I stayed there till 9:30 at night. It's for those kids. It's for the people we serve to do that. So our goal at the Legislative Auditor's Office where we work is to help you with those kind of things, to serve those people, whether they're happy little faces on a school bus, whether they're the people in your town that have problems that you can help them solve, improving a way of life and everything else. So we're going to talk about strong financial policies, because to me, I'm not talking about any other policies except financial, because that's outside of my area of expertise, and I'm talking about strong. I'm not talking about bare minimum. I'm not talking about weak. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about strong policies, okay, to do that. So we're going to talk about why they're important and the difference between all this stuff, because you have to get the laws, policies, and procedures in your mind to know what it is you want to say and which of those three it best fits in. Laws, you know, that's not our purview, but we have to figure that stuff out. We're going to talk about steps to developing them, and I will tell you mistakes I make along the way. And why do I tell you this? Because I don't want you to make the same mistakes as me, okay, along the way in doing this kind of thing. And then we're going to go through some policies. I will not get to all of those. I just promise you right now, I will not get to the 12 key ones by the statewide AUPs, because we have a session on that this afternoon that goes into that, and we're going to look at those GFOA policies. All right. Let me tell you about Newcastle, Delaware. Newcastle, Delaware, this is the importance. Why are financial policies important? So this town in Delaware was facing a $100 million revenue shortfall. Now, how in heaven's name do you think a policy is going to help them generate revenue? But it did. So what did they do? They looked at things like user fees. So user fees in a town are often those utilities. Are we charging the right fees to cover our costs, to earn a profit? What are our costs? We have ongoing costs, and then we have our costs to do capital improvements. Okay, they looked at that. They're looking at this was a government clearly that had idle funds, and they invested those funds. So you can put them, American Rescue Plan Act, we had this discussion yesterday. American Rescue Plan Act money, unlike most federal grant money, you can earn interest on it, and you can keep the interest, and you can use the interest for anything you want. So why wouldn't you want to earn interest on that money? Because you can use that in your government, right? Generates revenue. They're looking at that on their investments. And then they were looking at their revenue collection. So what does it mean in a town for revenue collection? What it means is making sure that people pay their utility bills. Okay, so this is what they wanted to do, and they looked at these policies. They adopted policies like this, and look at what happened in this town. They actually generated about $38 million of revenue. Now, it took a while. It isn't the whole $100 million, okay? $38 million is nothing to sneeze at, just by having strong financial policies. Just by having strong financial policies. So they really can make a difference. And what does that mean to have a AAA bond rating? Never had a AAA bond rating, but I can tell you this. That's the cost of borrowing money. And when you have a high bond rating, it means it's a very, very high likelihood you're going to pay back the money. That means low risk. And so that means that the interest rate they charge you can be less than somebody that's a higher risk of not paying it back. So that's what we all strive to do when we issue debt. Financial policies are really, really important. So what are they, really? They're guidelines for our strategic decision-making, our operational and strategic decision-making. So related to financial matters, okay? Not related to everything, like I worked at a school board. Don't ask me about student searches, not my area, right? But we're just talking about financial policies. Policies, definitely, policy needs to be adopted by your governing body. Why? It's got to have some weight to it. The harder that it is to adopt, then you need to back that out when you want to change. It needs to be hard. That's why our process for laws are so hard and so complicated, and they have to go through committees and the Senate, the House, reconcile all that, right? Why? Because it's a big, big deal. It's a big, big deal. Policies are the same way in our organization. You look at them, you see if they need to be updated, but it needs to be a big deal. So I'm just going to tell you, one of my titles in the past was Director of Business Services. That's what we're called at school boards, which I affectionately called the Director of BS. And why did I call that? Because I'm a nerd for policies, right? And I needed them to be that way. And some people didn't understand my policies for that. But they need to be adopted by that governing body. And here's the thing. What do we talk about that AAA bond rating? They're very, very important. Okay, so if you have debt outstanding, you want to have a high bond rating. What happens when you have a higher bond rating and a good revenue stream to pay it back? You don't have to have those reserves. It costs less to borrow that money. So that's what you're striving for. Credit rating agencies, so here's my story. My very first call for a credit rating agency, thankfully I had very good bond counsel who said, tell us the questions you're going to, they had all his documents, tell us the questions you're going to ask us, put them in writing. So the guy put all these questions in writing, took me 2 weeks to research to get answers because I didn't know the answers to a lot of his questions. But I was ready when for that call. Then I had that call and we went through that thing, and this was 2010, maybe 2011. And you know what he said to me? He said, what are you doing about your other post-employment benefit liability? In those days, so this is a I'm so old story. So I'm so old that back in those days, you did not have to book that liability. You had to disclose it in your notes. So he read that liability, I forget what it was, $6 million, some astronomical amount, you know, whatever. And he said, what are you doing about that? And I said, because I always tell the truth, my little sister was very good at lying. I am not very good at lying. So I said, we're not really doing anything about it right now. Okay. And we went on and we had our bond rating. Well, can I tell you something? I hung up that phone. I took my little steps right down to that superintendent's office and I said, we have to do something about OPEB because I never want to answer that question like that again. And guess what we did? We opened up a bank account and we started moving money and we started setting it over there. When your rating analyst says jump, you say how high. Okay, that's what you do. So they're very, very important to those things. They looked at our debt reserve policy, our debt management policy, our general fund reserve, and our investment policy as part of the credit rating. Why? Part of the credit rating is financial management. So they're looking at us saying, are we making good financial decisions? Are we getting good financial information, right? Making good financial decisions with that. That's a strong financial management. They're looking for that. That goes hand in hand really with that strategic intent, right? So this is what I wanted to do. There are people out there, there are people listening today that have great policies. I'm going to tell you that I plagiarized your policies, okay, because I do Google searches and find all this when I had to write policies myself. And And so I would go out there and look for all that stuff. There are always people who do it better than you. But if you're one of those people like I was, maybe a little competitive, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, theirs is really good and mine is not so good. I want to be like them. I want to be like them. So you call and you ask and you find out what are they doing. So in our adult world with policies, it's okay to plagiarize with that. And then they institutionalize those good financial management practices. And what does that mean? Turnover may happen in your office, turnover may happen with your board, but if you've got strong policies, that stuff continues, okay? What are some other good things about them? They definitely, for me, define the limits that I could take. So in policy, as the CFO, I could do this and I could do no more. But you know the other thing about in policy? I remember when I read the policy on post-issuance tax compliance, the CFO has to do, I'm like, dude, that's me. Like, I didn't know this, I better get to work. Because in the policy it said what my responsibilities were, and until I read it, like, I didn't know. So it was institutionalized in there. I'm like, I better learn this stuff and figure it out and figure out what to do, and I did. You know, so it sets those limits, but it also tells you what your responsibilities are. And it does promote that long-term thinking. So we have to have long-term thinking. This has always been kind of my second, like, passion, right? But I'm seeing more and more in the work that I do with a variety of local governments now that you really, really need to think long-term, and you really need to think strategically. It's not just this one budget year. It's what's coming. What's the future? You know, what's happening? We just heard about working in a remote environment and how to lead people in that environment. You know, I think that's coming. It's here. It's arrived. What does the future look like? We just heard about cybersecurity. That stuff's coming. You know, what does that look like? So, it's there, it's coming. We need to think long term. And when you go and you hear about and you read about the people who are thinking long term, try to identify those trends. And you can think about in your place, like, where is a place for that for me? And also, it helps us to manage risks. That's what happened to Delaware. They had some risks. They had some revenue shortfalls, right, in Newcastle? And it helped them to manage those. Now, I will tell you this. Do not put in policy something that's not really a best practice or a minimum, right? You need to do well. You don't ever want to have a policy that's like flat out wrong, okay, that allows behavior that ought not be allowed, right? So it definitely wants to be best practices. And I'm not talking about bare minimum practices. I'm talking about best. Okay, let's talk about two Rouges. We have East Baton Rouge Parish and we have Mer Rouge. That's up in Morehouse Parish. Okay, so I looked these two guys up and I got some stats, and look at EBR. They have a high population. I think they're the highest populated parish in our state. They've got 49 funds. Like, I'm out of fingers and toes. I need to borrow somebody else's. 49 funds, really? What Stacy was talking about yesterday, probably every single kind of those funds times, you know, 3 or 4, right? Their revenues for all funds are $1.4 billion with a B. Okay, so now you have to think about materiality and adjust your calculator, because some of those numbers, like, don't work in your calculator, right, depending on what it is. For those kind of things. They have total assets of $4.1 billion, all that debt outstanding. Let's look at Mer Rouge up there in Morehouse Parish. What do they have? They have 600 people. They're a village. They're small. They have a small population. They've got one component unit. They're, I think, a sewer district. They got two funds, not 49, two funds. So my point is $661,000 in their general fund. Do you think that my Chihuahua and my Great Dane both need financial policies? What you think? Absolutely. Because look at all the things that are filled in. They have people, they have revenues, they have assets, they have funds. Like, yeah, they both need policies. It's for everybody. And there's a little Chihuahua that lives on my street named Tinkerbell. And Tinkerbell is very, very small. They like 9 inches. But Tinkerbell walks out there with her great big ears way high up in the air and her little tail way high up in the air and barks at every doggone car that goes down that street and traces the street. Tinkerbell does not know she's little. She thinks she is big and she can take anybody on, okay? That's how Mare Rouge needs to be, right? Even if you're small, act like the big guys, do like the big guys, and find somebody to do that. Okay, now I know some people don't like policies because it restricts what they can do and they get all mad about that stuff and like, I don't like policies, okay? So let's talk about that. There's this concept of control and there's this concept of flexibility. So, and look, you can't have both. You have more of one, less of another. That's just kind of how this goes, okay? So when do you want more control? You want more control when you need a policy facing these kinds of things. Maintain fairness, remove discretion for that, ensure integrity for areas often associated with the kind of stuff that Greg talked about in the morning. So these are thou shalts, okay? So a thou shalt policy can be something like, thou shalt reconcile the bank statements every single month by the 15th of the month. That's a thou shalt. Look, we ain't talking about fairness. We're not talking about anything like that. No, it's happening. That's how it goes, okay? Well, let's talk about flexibility. When do you want flexibility? Well, you want flexibility to meet performance goals. So let's talk about maybe like with budgeting, right? Budgetings are not thou shalt. We have to do a lot of talking when we adopt our budgets. We have to do a lot of negotiating. We have to do a lot of thinking. And you know what? It's not Diane Allison's budget like it is at my house where my husband asked me for permission. I'm going on the record. He asked me for permission so he could buy wood for his ramp on his barn. Okay, so I was flattered. We've been married 32 years. And I said, William, he knows he's in trouble when I call him William. Are you asking me for permission to spend like 30 bucks? He said, yeah. I said, dude, we don't work like that. You go spend whatever you want and you just tell me, look at my nice ramp. And I'm like, that's good. I'm glad you won't get stuck in the mud. But anyway, right? So more flexibility budgeting. Why? Because we have the public input. Because they have visions, right, for their community, and they have needs that they want to do. And also, when you need a situation on a case-by-case basis. So what I wanted to fine-tune this for you, this argument for you, is with user fees. So let's look at our flexible policy. Our flexible user fee policy says user fees are just going to be commensurate with the cost of providing the service. Okay, so somehow in relation to the cost of providing the service, somehow. So now managers have to decide how much of that cost of providing that service are we going to put in user fees. So maybe it's expressed as a %, right, or something like that. So managers can decide. So when you want people to use things, you're going to lower the fee. So you want people to go to your museums. And if it costs 60 bucks, they're not going to go to your museum for 60 bucks. But if you have a discount, if you have 10 bucks, you know, some basic amount, they're going to come to your museum, right? And to see it because you want them to do that. So that way, managers have discretion, all right? A lot of flexibility there. You could have tiers, right? You could have your senior discount and your discount, you know, kids under 2 free and things like that. Let's look at that from a control policy perspective. User fees have to be set up that covers 100% of the cost and will be reviewed annually, okay? Will be, not maybe, reviewed annually to make sure the target is being met. Now, when do you want that? And all of my municipalities who operate utilities say I need that. Because they can't exist tomorrow. Remember the long-term thinking? If you are not charging the right rate for your utilities, you cannot replace those assets when they break. You cannot afford to maintain them, and it's not sustainable going forward. Okay? So that's an example. So whatever policy you're working on, think about that control versus flexibility. So here we go this is my favorite one of all time. So I stole this sentence from 3 different policies. The second paragraph, okay? Funding shall be prioritized for programs and providers that have a demonstrated track record of success in achieving the school board's desired learning outcomes. Like, I can't write this stuff, I'm an accountant, okay? That's why I stole it from somebody, you can tell, for students, and that those programs that are proven to produce larger gains in student learning relative to the cost. I was so proud of that sentence. That's like Paul in the Bible, like in 1 Corinthians, right? Like all of us in school, like, okay, so I'm so old that in school when we had to learn about writing sentences and diagramming them, those are the sentences we did to make sure our phrases and what was matching and everything else. So this is one of them. But that's a kind of thing, to me, that sets some parameters, right? But it also has a little bit of flexibility in there. Okay. So let's go over this a little bit more. I want to compare and contrast with procedures. Policies, overarching guidelines. Don't get in the weeds there, right? Principles of financial, so we talk about principles and rules-based, right? Procedures are more detailed steps. Like, she's going to do this, she's going to do this, she's going to do this kind of thing. Policies are written down in an authoritative document. They have to be approved, they should be approved by the board. Diane Allison cannot set policy. As right as I think I am, that's a wrong way to do a policy. I'm going to tell you a story about that. And then they have to be concise. Not a lot of detail in there. Not a lot of detail. It's in procedures. They may or may not be written down, but as you all know, because you've been around for statewide agreed upon procedures, spoiler alert, needs to be written down. Needs to be written down. That's the documentation that you have that. Right? They're not adopted by the governing body. Why? Because they frequently change. Why? Because we get new hires with new skills, we shuffle work around, we get new software, we get a new bank, we'll make you do that. We all of a sudden start accepting payment by credit card. I could go on and on of why procedures change, but they change. And procedures can be lengthy, intentionally lengthy. Okay? Why? Because they have to have that level of detail. Policies are written for a broad audience, right? Procedures, staff level. Your procedures need to only be to the people who need to know them. Do not put your procedures on the internet, because you just heard Les Nettleton talk. And if what will happen is you have procedures when you want to be reimbursed for a travel expense or something like that, here are the procedures on the internet, here are the procedures vendors need to do to start submitting invoices, then all the world knows, and they're going to fake the stuff and they're going to trick you. So you don't do that. That's in-house. That's on your intranet and for the people who need to know. Staff level directives, okay? Policies are developed through a process. We're going to talk about that. And procedures often have evolved over time. This is where they can be wrong. Not intentionally. They just can be wrong because we don't know. Because we don't know. Y'all are here and you're participating online because you want to know. You want to do it right. But a lot of times they've evolved. And so then you come and you learn things and you think about, now I need to do it better. I need to change my procedures. So this is an example. I'm going to save time so y'all can read this. But like, which one is the policy and which one is the procedure? So when you look at the formality of B, that's a policy. Okay, this is about ad valorem, adopting ad valorem. We should all have policies about adopting our ad valorem and how it goes, cycle, calendar, all those kind of rules and responsibilities. But you can see the formal language and the higher level that B is written than A. So now we have a couple test questions. So here's our first test question for it. True or false? Do I really need financial policies? If it's already covered, like if there's a law that says, it doesn't come out and say yet that you can't invest in cryptocurrency, but what it does say is you can only invest in these things. So do I need a policy on investments? Do I really need a policy on budgeting? Because there's a local government budget act that says all these things. You know, what about my ethics policy? There's a law about that. Like, why do I need a policy? What y'all think? Exactly. I think generally we do need policies because laws don't go far enough. And you know what? Laws are written for an even broader audience way, way up here than policies, because that's like the state of Louisiana. Then there's us and our organizations, and then there's procedures like at my desk, right? So let's go look at budgeting, for example. So here's what the statute says, you know, the kinds of things that it says, but policy, like which funds? Okay, so we talked about yesterday about capital projects fund. You know what? The law doesn't say you have to adopt a budget for capital projects fund, but do you want it in your organization? Yes or no? You know, we may. It may be very important to us. What's the length of the budget period? We may want to do multi-year budgeting. In the law, it says 1 year, so we may want to do 2 years. That's cool. Legal level of budgetary control, what's that? Who has authority when to move money around? So sometimes I can only, so mine is at a department level, okay? So where I am at the legislative auditor, I have this department. So I have so much money, I'm just going to tell you, for miscellaneous. It's a great line item. I don't know what it is, but I love it, okay? I have my money budgeted there. And when we go over on supplies, I pull from miscellaneous to supplies. So my legal level of budgetary control is at the department level. My total budget for my department is X. No more, Diane. You can't spend more than X. Okay? Some can't even move between categories, but I get to move between categories. Where I worked at school boards, huge $100 million budgets, right? $300 million was the general fund in Ascension. That was at the fund level. So that was general fund, $300 million, no more. Make it work. And we made it work. Okay? Those kinds of things. So you're going to look, what is your definition of a balanced budget? That's a whole nother conversation, and I could talk an hour on that, you know. But when you think about fiscal sustainability, long-term planning, your best definition of a balanced budget is this year, expenditures cannot exceed revenues. End of discussion. No more. Can't hear anything else. Expenditures can't exceed revenues, okay? But may not work in your category, in your organization. May be a little harder to do when there's fiscal stress going on, right? So here's kind of the continuum between laws and policies, just because I'm a visual person, okay, so I need to see this. So laws are on the end where they're like really authoritative, really formal, you know, a whole lot difficult to change. Procedures are over here, so I felt really, really powerful. So look, in my career, I have had audit findings. And I get my little Diane feelings hurt. And my first question to the auditor, at small places, like I knew how to fix them. As I went to bigger places and things were more complex and decentralized, and like IT was not under me, you know, at bigger places, HR was not under me. So like I lost control, right? So I'm like, how do I fix this? Like what do I do? How do I fix this? And my auditor would tell me how to fix that. Well, guess what I did? I went back to my desk, I pulled up that doggone procedure, and I rewrote the thing. And I'm like, boom, and sent it out. You know, thou shalt have a checklist that when somebody terminates, I remember doing this one because something happened and we didn't do something right when somebody terminated because whatever department didn't know. So I'm like, okay, new thing, checklist, send it to all of these departments so all of these departments know when the guy terminated, okay, when somebody terminated. I could go back and do that procedure at my desk, you know, while I'm eating my lunch in the other hand. So a whole lot easier to change. Okay, effective policies. We want effective policies. Andre talked to us about what effective is, right? And so all of these characteristics. So let's talk about that accessibility on your for your policies. Okay, and I went and did some research looking for policies and stuff like this for this. But the thing is that they need to be very easily accessible. Why? Because I don't want you to be like me, right, and read in a policy that you have responsibility that you were not carrying out. I don't know who you thought was carrying it out. I just wasn't getting done. I'm just going to say it wasn't getting done, right? So you need to know where they are. They need to be accessible. People need to know what they are. And I'll tell you another thing about policies. Auditors can't stand when you violate a policy. They just can't stand it, okay? They get really, really mad with you. And that's a lot of how you learn you actually have a policy that says that kind of stuff, and you're like, where'd this come from? But the thing about it is if the policy is no longer working, because this happened to me, it's no longer working because it's so doggone outdated. Change your policy. Instead of having the auditor say, you're violating your own policy, like how stupid is that? You don't know your own policy? No, I didn't know that one. I didn't know that one. You know, so that's why you have to look at them and keep them updated. So when you're sitting there writing policies, like look at these things. What's the purpose for this policy? Usually, like Houston, we have a problem. Okay, what is the policy? You might put in there some procedures. This is at a high level. The superintendent shall do X. The finance director shall do Y. Usually it says the finance director shall develop written procedures to make sure, we're investing according to our policy, or things like that. Laying out that responsibility and that authority, right? You can delegate authority, but you can't delegate responsibility. You can't delegate that. If I'm responsible, I'm responsible. I need to know that. And any definitions for things that aren't there. So here's our second test question of the day. Dude, where are my policies? Where are my policies? So, they could be anywhere, right? And my point here, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands on A, B, C, and D. Why? Because the point that we want to make is they need to be easily accessible. And if they're locked up somewhere and they haven't been looked at, they're outdated. Your auditor looks at them, and stuff like that. But you need to get those things updated, right? And if you have no clue. So this is a lot of the same kind of things. So I hope that I have convinced you that you need them. They need to be in writing. And if that has not convinced you already, then look at the benefits of putting them in writing. Phenomenal. In this day and age, having that written procedure, the permanent record, training manual, orientation kind of thing, consistency. Jennifer Shea has told you many times, she keeps a list of every question asked to us. She searches that database. We have frequently asked questions. Why? She says, Diane, go look at the frequently asked questions so we can provide the consistent answer. Whether the phone call is to me or whether the phone call is to somebody else in our office. Go look it up. There's a way to look it up and be consistent with that. Okay? Easily present that complex information. Investment policy was kind of like that. Debt management can be like that. And they also can be used as a reference and all of those kind of things. All right. What gets us to need a new policy? Dude, something's happening. So it's a time, we had elections, we may have new people taking office, they may have a new vision. You may need that. A current problem. So in our office, we are working on a policy for artificial intelligence. Okay, so this is new, who'd have thought it, right? But you can go onto websites now and put in stuff and have artificial intelligence. That's a new thing that's happening. And right away, Jennifer said, dude, we need a policy. We need a policy. This could be bad. This could be misused, so we need a policy. So we're like, yeah, get us a policy. And we started talking about that. We'll talk about those steps to develop those. So lots of things. What you don't want so much is other governments' experiences, because sometimes those can be bad. You don't have a policy to address something. I remember when the internet came out and you needed internet policies and social media policies and all that phones at work and all that kind of stuff, right? Sometimes that's bad. So let's look at some steps to developing them. You definitely need to have that vision for what you want it to be. Okay, for me, I want, this is yes and this is not allowed. I was pretty clear on, easier said than done, but that's what I thought, right? Define the problem. What's the problem that we're trying to do? Draft the policy, but guess what? You don't always get it right the first time. So I was working on a policy, I think about audit committees at one place where I worked, and I'm like, I'm so smart, I know policies, I'm gonna write my policy. I wrote my policy, and guess what? It was woefully wrong. Why? Because I didn't involve other people, and I don't know everything. And when we got other people involved with different perspectives from different departments, we wrote a phenomenal policy. But I can't do it on my own. So I'm not a dictator, right? I come at it from an accounting, financial management perspective, but I had the best people to help you with policies, if you get to work with them, are engineers, because they are very, very process driven, and they just have this knack for seeing the whole process. I didn't have that knack. I'm still trying to develop that knack, right? To see the whole entire thing, because accountants we're usually honed in on the details for that. Involve more people. You need to have somebody review your policy, because what you don't want is for somebody to say, you can't put this in policy, that's illegal. So you definitely want that. Now you present it to your elected officials, because we know policies are adopted by the board, right? And so what a lot of organizations do is have maybe what they call, we do it here too, first readings, second readings, because it may be something that's very interesting to the public and they may want to chime in. And that people need to add, even though you got a team, now when you've exposed it to your elected officials and the public, there's even more input, you know, on that kind of stuff, right? So, and definitely have a public comment period. And you'll know when you have to do this and when you don't have to do this, and sometimes people really don't care, but give them the chance, especially for those ones that the public really, really cares about. And then you know, put it into practice, and then of course you have to monitor it, okay? So now we're gonna go through these kind of categories in our time that we have left, and we have, what, 10 minutes left? Okay, cool. We can do this. Okay, so these are the ones for the statewide AUPs. Now, can I tell you, these are bare minimum, okay? And we're talking about policies and procedures. Most of what's in these, and we'll just go through these really, really fast because there's a session at this, the last session of the day where we'll get into more detail on those, but a lot of those are at the procedural level, and they're not strong financial policies. They're just really procedures for internal control kind of thing, okay? But GFOA, my go-to place for all things governmental accounting and financial management, they have written, Shane Kavanaugh, he is my favorite author, and he has written this book, which is very beat up, called Financial Policies. And I swear in the old days, I'm so old that they used to print books. Okay, and so whenever I talked about financial policies, I'd go online and I'd buy a bunch of books and give them out. So I'm gonna tell you, I went to do that and I can't find it anymore because they're not printing books anymore. But this is my Bible. My pages are torn out, but can I tell you, this one here, Shane Kavanaugh signed. He said, so glad to have you as part of GFOA out there making a difference. That's what y'all are doing too. So I love this book. And if you want to learn more on this topic, like, get this book. So this was my to-do list. It is all marked up. Pages are falling out. I got my thing like on this list. So this is the list right here. He said, this is strong financial management. They're not bare minimum, okay? These are the kinds of things you have to have. Guess what policies my bond analyst asked me for? Fund balance, debt management, investing, and then he had the nerve to ask me about long-term financial planning. I'm like, I haven't got to that one yet. That's a harder policy to write. But guess what? When he asked about it, by the next bond rating call, I had it. I had it because it was important to him. So these are what they call essential. Don't leave home without it. Kind of just like your phone and your shoes, right? Don't leave home without it. Okay, then they have some highly advisable ones. And so the rest of the presentation is really going through. So I did a summary of the essential things that need to be in all of these for you, but we don't have time to go over them. But I really want to talk about these essential ones in about like 3 minutes or less. So your general fund reserve policy, it's so important. And look, you can't spend down all your money, because those of you like me who have been in government in a long time, rainy days come, they come, they come. They might be called a hurricane, they might be called an ice storm, they might be called COVID, they might be called a major employer leaving your place. It could be called anything, all right? But it comes, it comes. So it's never good to spend everything. What does GFOA say right now? They're actually, I get to work on this too. We're in the process of changing that policy, but right now the kind of standard thing is 15% of the higher of revenues, annual revenues, or annual expenditures, whichever is most volatile. That's bare minimum. That's bare minimum for you to have. So because bad times happen, they come, all kind of things that we don't know, helps us with that. So they talk about those reserve. Now, it's not enough to say that. How are you going to fund it? Where are you going to get the money from? It's not like you can do an ad valorem tax to fund your, adopt a millage, right? Where are you going to get that from? Generally, it comes from excess revenues. But in your policy, you're going to talk about what do you do with excess revenues. Maybe you, in your community, you have a capital project that you really need to fund. and get this stuff done. So maybe that's where you don't want to fund it. When I worked at civil court, I had 18 judges and 5 elected officials as my boss. So for those of you, that's 23 lawyers as an accountant's boss. So it was some tough times working there for them. But one of the goals we had was we wanted to save money to build a new courthouse. So that's how we did it. We put that in there and we had a policy. Who has authority over reserves? Look, I wanted to. I'm the CFO. Nah, that's not how it goes. That's just not how it goes, right? I can be at the table, but it's not my decision to make. It's other people. And reviewing those things. So let's look at our budgeting policy. We talked about why isn't a budgeting policy, why isn't the law enough? Why do we need more? We have to look at those things. Basis of budgeting. Yesterday, Stacy talked about those basis of accounting, right? Full accrual, modified accrual, cash basis, whatever. Okay, in our world, let me just tell you the recipe to make your life easier. If you do everything on your same reporting basis, your world is easier. Modified accrual for your governmental funds makes the world easier. Otherwise, you have to convert. That can be real technical, and if you don't know how to do it, and you have to pay a firm to do it, you know, all the CPA firms listening, just do this for 1 minute and stick your fingers in your ears, but it's going to cost you money, right? So you may want to make your life simple. I never had as many people as I wanted on my staff, so I tried to keep things simple. And we talked about those other things in there. You do want performance measurements, because how do you know? Like, you don't know if you're achieving your goal. You got to have what your goal is. You got to have your objectives to get there, right? You have to know what those things are. Your principles for budgeting and the kinds of things that you're going to do here. You know, assigning costs to others. We talked about those internal service funds. That's what that is, right? Assigning costs. How much those user fee things. You know, how much are we going to charge out for those things? Capital improvement plan for your capital asset. This is a big deal. We have to take care of our infrastructure. You know, like as a country, what are we rated? D minus. You know, stuff is falling apart. I don't know how many of you can't go across a bridge, right? Because like it's not safe anymore. Has to be maintained. So look at these things and think about this is long-term planning, you know, for that kind of stuff. And then managing your capital assets as well. Debt management, this is a big deal. Anybody who's been a college kid who had a credit card, I'm so old that back in the day, I had a checkbook, there were no ATMs, there was no online stuff, and a check took like 5 days to clear. Now, I'm a good accountant today, but when I was 18, not so good, okay? And so I bounced a check. I'll never forget, because it was like, I forget how much money it was, but the NSF fee, like I don't have 25 bucks for an NSF fee. You know, that was terrible. So thinking about the purposes of why you issue debt. Why do I have my credit card? What kinds of things can go on that? In your personal life, it's the same thing in business. You don't want to issue debt, generally speaking, for operations. You need to fund that with your current revenues. So debt is big things. Another big, strong financial thing is matching the term of your debt with the life of the asset. So if I am going to issue debt for 10 years to buy a police vehicle that has a useful life of 3 or 5, do you see how that's a mismatch? Yeah, that's no good. That's no good. And then also when you issue debt, you're kicking the can down the road, right, to the next generation. So you need really, really strong things about your debt. And it's a lot to watch. Why? Because now you're in the big leagues. You're playing in the financial markets of the world. That's the people who buy your bonds. People all over the world. Can't fool with those. So those are those kind of things. And then the long-term financial planning policy components, just to think about that. And you do need that strategic thing. That's what you need to think about. Think strategically. And I've looked at many strategic plans. Our office, like you know my predecessor, Bradley Cryer. I love Bradley Cryer. He was very, very helpful to me. And I get to sit in the chair. I think that he sat in, but I'm definitely in his office. And I get to look at his stuff. And when I go find his stuff, I get an insight into his very brilliant mind. And one of the things that I saw in there was his strategic plan for the local government services and how we can best serve you guys. I was just looking at it the other day, like last week, and I'm like, this is so cool. I need to carry out his work. I need to do what he did. So investment policy, you need those. So like you all can, I know I'm out of time, or just about out of time on these things. So just take a look at all of these, and it's got these components in it. The book is very, very good on all of these things for you, the kinds that you need to have. Economic development is hilarious to me. I thought I didn't need it, but guess what? Anybody who has ad valorem millages, who has industry, now we have industrial tax exemption, right? So I am so old that back in the day, the Board of Commerce and Industry approved all of those, and it never went to a local governing body, thank you. And so when I first wrote, when I first wrote my GASB 77 note disclosure on tax abatements, I'm like, the state abates my local taxes, but that's not the case anymore. It's not the case anymore. So you do need an economic development policy. Like, what kind of things are you going to do? What kind of things are best? So the place to start, like, you got to roll it, you just have to do it, right? Roll up your sleeves. And you're going to start here. I think this is a good way to go, because if you don't have our statewide AUP one, you get an exception. Okay, so you don't want to be there, right? You need to solve all of those first. That's just strong internal controls. And get going on those essential policies. And look, just go steal from people. Just go search the web. Universities are very good at putting their stuff out, and you will learn so much. So again, kudos to my buddy Shane Kavanaugh. I absolutely, I consume all of his work. He's the director of research at GFOA, and he's on the forefront of so many things. So I recommend that you somehow, look, I know you can buy it on Amazon. I might not be supposed to say that for GFOA, but whatever way you can, if this is your area of expertise for that. So thank you so much for your attention. We are going to go on a break now for lunch, and we give you a little bit of extra time. So we're due back to start at 1:30. So that gives you time to eat, take a little nap in your car, and answer your emails. Thank you so much.